Well, let's tell you that following his arraignment for alleged abuse of office and allocation of $4.5 billion and also 2.8 billion naira, the Lagos High Court in Ikeja yesterday ordered the remand of embattled former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, Godwin Emefiele, in the care of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Emefiele entered a not guilty plea to the allegations against him, as did his co-defendant, Herry Omoile, who was charged on 26 new counts before Justice Rahman Oshodi.
Ladi-Lawal, the defendant's attorney, begged the judge to grant Emefiele bail in self-recognizance so he can continue with the bail that the Abuja court had previously granted him. He also asked the court to award the second defendant the bail that Justice Osule Hamzat had previously granted him. After hearing both sides of the argument, Judge Oshodi, however, remanded Emefiele to the EFCC's custody and the second defendant to the Ikoyi Correctional Center. The case was then postponed to April 11th in order to decide on bail and start the trial. We're joined in our discussion this morning by the Executive Director of the Sterling Law Center, Deji Ajare. Good morning, Mr. Ajare, and thank you very much for joining the show this morning. Looking at the case of Godwin Emefiele, it's taking a lot longer than many would have expected, as we haven't even gotten into trial. We're still trying to decide on the matters of bail. Some have referred to this as an abuse of office. What's your perspective regarding exactly how this matter has been handled?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and good morning. The manner in which the trial of Godwin Emefiele is going on, while not necessarily violating any rules of procedure of courts, but it's just it's a reminder of the inefficiencies in our criminal justice system once again. Where people are apprehended, arrested, and their freedoms curtailed on mere suspicion. People are arrested to be investigated. Here in our crimes, a very, very improper procedure. Because in an ideal situation, a person may be invited for interrogation, for questioning, to answer questions. But nobody should ordinarily be arrested until at least there is reasonable belief, reasonable ground to keep them in detention. And that is why our constitution is clear. When it made the provisions for detention of persons for a maximum of 48 hours, the assumption being that before you accost and arrest somebody and curtail their freedom, you already have some evidence in place with which you want to prosecute the person, and it is expected that within a period of 48 hours you would have arranged the person properly in court and be ready for trial. But what the EFCC is doing, what the DSS has done with Emefiele, clearly shows that Emefiele was arrested before investigations into his alleged crimes even commenced. And this is not just peculiar to Godwin Emefiele. This is exactly how law enforcement agents act. Clearly arresting persons, detaining them, getting spurious orders from courts for remand, only for them to start investigation. And that is the reason there was an initial arraignment and then these amended charges. And then I assure you, before the end of this whole saga, there are going to be further amendment to these charges. It is typical of our law enforcement agents. There is something to take away from here. What we need to take away from here is, at the end of the day, if somebody of the stature of Godwin Emefiele, as a former governor of the CBN, is undergoing this kind of experience, now imagine what regular Nigerians would experience daily in the hands of law enforcement agents. Persons who were arrested only because they were just walking at the wrong place at the wrong time will be arrested and kept in detention for several years, for months. And I think for me, that, yes, clearly would amount to an abuse of powers of law enforcement.
All right. Well, there are also new charges, 26 count new charges as well that did come up on Monday. Many are saying that it's starting to look like it's a witch hunt because there were some previously and now again new ones. What do you make out of that?
Now, you know, when you adopt improper procedure, when you adopt these kinds of tactics to keep somebody locked up for a long time, the allegations of...
All right, Mr. Deji. Okay, I guess we do have a network glitch there. All right, go ahead, please.
You would agree with them that there is basis for them to suspect that this might be a witch hunt. And of how under the government of President Muhammadu Buhari, the former NSA then, Dasuki, was kept in detention for practically throughout the tenure of the president then, and ultimately, eventually, he was released without conviction. So some of these things would lend credence to that suspicion that yes, this is a witch hunt. But of course, the allegations, the fear that this might be a witch hunt will not be confirmed until the end of the entire saga. But I think ultimately what it calls us to do as a people, as a nation, is that we must strictly adhere to rules of procedure, whether before trial or during trial.
If this Godwin Emefiele case continues in the manner that it already is being run, where, like many have said, and that you have agreed to, that the rule of law is not being followed, what are the fears about how this might impact law enforcement in the coming years? Hello, Mr. Ajare, can you hear us? Okay. Which seems that there's some form of disconnection with him. We're hoping that we can reconnect with him. And I'd like... Mr. Ajare, are you back with us?
All right. Anyway, well, I think in one of his comments, especially his analysis in the first analysis, he did make mention that if it's happening to the CBN governor this way, then you can as well imagine what it would look like, would be like for citizens of the country who may not have attained the kind of status that a CBN governor
for the everyday regular man.
Yeah, exactly. For the everyday regular
there's a stipulation as to exactly how law enforcement should carry out its responsibility. When you have a case against someone, you gather your facts, you bring them before a court of competent jurisdiction within a certain time frame. First of all, if we look at how they kept Godwin Emefiele in detention for over 60 days without any evidence against him whatsoever, that was already an infringement on his fundamental human rights. And we've seen it happen not just with Godwin Emefiele. We saw it with Nnamdi Kanu. We saw it with the former EFCC chair, Bala. We've seen it with many people. So you do your due diligence. You have your investigation being carried out, ensure that you have enough evidence. So when you can establish a prima facie case against the person, you bring them before the court of competent jurisdiction, rather than doing it the other way around. You arrest them, then you start doing your investigation, detain them, looking for evidence against them. Whether we like it or not, I agree with Emefiele. I mean, many Nigerians were not in support of Emefiele, especially because of the Naira policy and how it impacted Nigerians. But we must call a spade a spade. We must be, because the risk in saying, oh yes, it's good, let it happen to this person, is that what goes around comes around. When it happened to the Jews, they say, oh, it doesn't concern us. When it happened to this one, it doesn't concern us. By the time it happens to you, there'll be nobody left to speak for you. And that's exactly what the concern is with this. If we continue the flagrant abuse of law, where the supremacy of the law over the rulers and the ruled is not established and is not respected, let's not expect a different tune to be sung when it's your turn or my turn, right? We want to be sure that ours is a country where adequate emphasis is placed on how things are being done. We're still joined, our guest has joined us back. We have the Executive Director of the Sterling Law Center. We're looking at the Godwin Emefiele case. And I was asking you, you did allude to the fact that the rule of law is not being followed. So what are your fears and concerns? Should this matter continue in the way that it already has carried on. What are your fears and concerns about how this might impact law enforcement in the coming years?
Well, I had already made reference earlier to the case of Jasuki, the former NSA under Goodluck Jonathan, who was arrested and kept in detention perpetually under the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, because things like that had happened in the past and there were no consequences, governments and subsequent, governments are encouraged to, perpetuate similar activities, similar violations, clear violations of the rights of citizens, and with the belief that ultimately they can get away with this without consequences. Now, the fear for me, and perhaps for those who have expressed concerns, is that the CBN governor may be put through a similar situation as someone like Dasuki. And if that happens and there is no consequence, what it means is that, of course, like we have already agreed, that would be clear violations of the principles, the rules, the rule of law, and that would mean that in subsequent years, under subsequent governments, same thing can happen to anyone, including anybody, even in this government, no matter how powerful they are. And for me, it's still what this brings us to is that if it can happen to anybody as powerful as this, then it can happen to any citizen. And if there is that possibility, then we all should be worried as citizens of Nigeria. We all should be concerned, and we all should speak out about it. And one would expect that ultimately persons who feel aggrieved such as this should take steps to get redress.
All right. We've seen the judiciary come under fire in recent times. We've seen that happen in the cases like you've mentioned in the past. And I think as well, during the elections, the 2023 elections, we did see a lot of persons talk about what the judiciary is indeed doing and how they are not so happy with it.